It's the most magical time of the year, and I'm not talking about Christmas. I'm talking about the NFL season. So make sure you're ready with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV. Get the most live NFL games all in one place. Right now, you can save $85 when you bundle NFL Sunday Ticket with YouTube TV. Sign up today at youtubetv.com/Spotify. Device and content restrictions apply. Discount applied to first 4 months of YouTube TV, then $72.99 a month. Ends August 29th. Terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. No refunds.
We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in the film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow at JonnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, Shane. I think we may need to edit the intro for the off-season. The in-depth film study is it may be pushing it a little bit this week. I will be completely honest. There is some film study. It was I watched them. I have an idea who they are, but I think in-depth would be a slightly concerning statement. If you're watching the UDFAs, every single one in-depth, then fair play to you. I watch enough film after doing every single draft pick to then go and do every single UDFA in depth. So yeah, maybe we need like an off-season version that's like slightly in depth. We tried.
We will be bringing you some sort of show that gets an A for effort.
Yeah, we would do something for you to try and keep you occupied during the off-season. I know you're going to read out some reviews as well, Shane. Before you do so, I will a little plea to anyone listening now. If you have any ideas of off-season shows, we are all ears. We obviously don't want to do like the just usual generic stuff. So we're going to try and get some cool guests on and talk about as much sort of schematic X's and O stuff as we can. But if you do have any ideas, please tweet us. Please give us a shout. We aren't going anywhere over summer. So please do let us know.
Yeah, if you have a topic you would like to see us cover, like last week when we did the evolution of the running game in the NFL, or if you have a guest that you would like for us to bring on, shoot us a DM on Twitter, or you can join our Patreon, Discord, or the Patreon website and shoot us ideas there as well. We definitely want to do what you guys want to talk about. So before we dive into our UDFA film review, I do want to shout out a couple of reviews. The first one coming from Juan SG on Apple Podcast. He says, "I'm a simple man when it comes to sports. I enjoy a work product and I remain committed to it. BGN Radio provided my fix, and I'll always miss them and love how they serve the community on the airwaves. But this is my new fix. Shane and Jonny have incredible analysis, and it speaks for itself, and it has through all their great content. John Stolnis has consistently produced some of my favorite content on the feed, and his Eagles Memories episodes have been fantastic. A giant thank you to everyone involved in the project. Can't wait to see how it develops." So thank you, Juan, for that one. We also had another one from RJ Ski God that said, "I was becoming a big fan of the Shane page, and then it mysteriously disappeared along with the other good BGN pods. I was super stoked to find it again. You can listen to all the big names," and he lists some other Eagles podcasts, and he says, "They are all great. But the Shane page goes deep inside the film and gives you a depth of insight not easily found anywhere else. Love the show." So appreciate you guys for following us onto the new feed. And again, not everybody's aware because not everybody's on Twitter. Some people may be still wondering why BGN Radio went dark. So if you watch the show, if you listen to the show, please share it out. And those ratings and reviews help us get the content out to more people. So now all that to say, appreciate you guys. And because we appreciate you guys, we dove into UDFAs, and it's not going to be as in-depth as our others were. One, it's harder to find film on some of these guys. And two, I just know. So I watched 2 games of one of these guys. I watched some highlights of some other guys and read some scouting reports. So we're going to talk about them. At the end of the day, not very many UDFAs make the roster. So I didn't want to devote too much film study into this, but just a little recap. The Eagles in 2023, they signed 9 UDFAs. Mekhi Gardner and Ben Van Sumeren appeared in games, but did not make the initial 53-man roster. Eli Ricks was the lone guy from the 9 that did. In 2022, they signed 12 UDFAs, and Josh Jobe, Britton Covey, and Reed Blankenship are the three that actually made it into the roster. So the Eagles signed 7 UDFAs this year. Maybe one of these guys is going to make the team. Maybe some of them will hang around the practice squad, but that's kind of what you can expect from UDFA. So out of the 7, they signed 3 offensive tackles, which I don't think is surprising because there was a lot of speculation they would take an offensive tackle in the first round even. So taking 3 UDFAs, that's not surprising to me. They also took a tight end, which they've been a tight end wasteland behind Dallas Goedert for years. That's not surprising, and a few other guys that we'll get into. So let's start with the guy that Jonny and I think is probably most likely to make the roster, and that's defensive tackle Gabe Hall out of Baylor. Gabe Hall was listed on Bruce Feldman's freak list at 6'6", 295 pounds in college, which is 96th percentile and 15th percentile respectively. He benched 500 pounds, squatted 565 pounds, and he was clocked at 19.9 miles per hour on the GPS in college. So here's his spider chart if you're watching along. 96th percentile height, 15th percentile weight, 87th percentile arm length, and fairly average athleticism as terms as percentiles go. He had a 9.25 relative athletic score. Across his 5 seasons at Baylor, he had 77 tackles, 16.5 tackles for loss, and 12.5 sacks. Last season, per PFF, he had 21 pressures and a 65.7 run defense grade with a 61.2 pass rush grade. And he played 1,454 snaps over the last 3 years. And so, Jonny, as you watched Gabe Hall, I think he's the guy you watched the most as well. What stood out to you from him?
Yeah, so a couple of things just to give you a bit of full disclosure. And firstly, a shout out to Charles in the chat saying he's here for Kendall Milton talk. We will get to him. The running back will be coming. I watch UDFAs in a very specific way. Spoiler alert, they're probably not very good because if they were, they would get drafted. So I don't really look for starting players. I know sometimes you get the occasional UDFA starter and that's great, but realistically, I just look for traits. So if you can do one thing really well, or you can add any sort of value to a team, whether that's special teams, whether that's a third down pass rusher, whether that's a first down run stopper, if it's defensive tackle, for example, I just look for traits. And basically Gabe Hall's, you showed the spider chart earlier on, instantly the arm length, wingspan and height stand out. When you combine that with a good vertical jump and a good athletic testing, immediately I'm all in because I'm well, what's the downside? You've got a unique talent that means you could provide something. So I'm not going to lie. As I said, I didn't watch him and think he was brilliant. I think he was the best one I watched in terms of his film. He looked to me like he could have been drafted. I was surprised he wasn't drafted. Sometimes I feel that way watching players, which makes you wonder if there's injury concerns. I think he's got perfect size for that 3 or 5 technique. I think the Eagles will quite like him there. He doesn't create a lot of pressure. And in the games I watched, I did watch a little bit more of Hall than the others. I don't know if this is a common theme, but he didn't seem to do a lot as the game went on. Sometimes he jumped off the screen early on and then he seemed to fade down the stretch. But we're not going to show loads of highlights on this episode. We are going to just give one clip to show you what they're like. There's a clip out there from, I believe, him at the Senior Bowl. And if you want to just see traits, you just see the arm length immediately. He's really disruptive as a run defender. I don't think he's going to impact immediately as a pass rusher, but you can see he's disruptive as a run defender because of how long he is. You can see his frame, you can see his build, you can see the arm length there as he jumps inside. So I think at worst case scenario, he could be a defensive tackle 6. He's got good arm length. He can maybe be someone who can rotate in on early downs and he's not going to kill you. And maybe there's a little bit of athleticism there to develop as a pass rusher, but at the moment it's not there. He'll need to work on his hand usage. His timing of the snap's inconsistent. But when you've got a wingspan that's that good, I'm instantly thinking, yeah, you've got a chance because you've got a trait that at least means I can see how you can win. There are certain players, all I want to see is, can I see it with him? And with Gabe Hall, I think he's got the size and the athleticism to suggest that there is something there. So as I mentioned, none of these guys are polished or they wouldn't have gone undrafted. But I do think he has a pretty decent chance actually as defensive tackle 5, defensive tackle 6. I imagine he might be one of those that's too talented to keep on the practice squad all year because I think you look at the spider chart, you look at the RAS score and it sort of jumps out. So yeah, I know you did watch Gabe Hall. Is anything else that you wanted to add about him in particular that sort of I missed?
Yeah, I thought there were times that he flashes like some pass rush potential. And if he can get that down, like if he could get the timing down, his long arms would aid him a lot. But he's a little all over the place with placement and timing. And so I think there's some potential there, especially as like a pass rusher at 4-eye, 5 technique, and an odd front, which we expect the Eagles to utilize an odd front heavily. Put him next to a Jordan Davis to free him up a little bit in terms of run responsibilities. And I just feel like overall he's really inconsistent. You mentioned him losing steam in a major way as the games go on. And there's times that I think he's a pretty good run defender. And then there's other times he just gets washed out completely. So getting consistency is going to be the name of the game for him. But I could see a world where he could develop into a, replacement level player, especially with some pass rushing ability, playing out on the edge a little more, that 5 technique next to a big run stuffer. So that was kind of my takeaway from him. And I think you're right. I think you could potentially have a hard time with him on a practice squad because I think most people expected him to get drafted. I'll be interested to see what he looks like in training camp and in preseason, and if he can end up on the Eagles active roster to start the season.
Yep, I would agree. Right, we are going to promise we're going to be short and sweet. So let's move on. Remind me who we had second on the list. These are, by the way, completely random order. I'm not doing this in order of who they're going to get drafted. This is just how I watch them.
Okay, our next guy is offensive tackle Gottlieb Aidze from Maryland. He played 4 seasons at D2 Frostburg State before he transferred to Maryland in 2023. He had 47 starts across his collegiate career. He played left tackle at Frostburg. He played mostly right tackle at Maryland, 459 snaps at right tackle, 124 snaps at right guard. He is 6'4", which is 13th percentile, 308 pounds, which is 30th percentile, with 12th percentile arm length, a 90th percentile 40-yard dash, and an 88th percentile broad jump. Overall, he had a 7.81 relative athletic score. If you want to go look at PFF charting, they gave him a 76.2 pass block grade and a 62.1 run block grade for 2023. And they charted him with 0 sacks and 14 pressures allowed on 386 pass blocking snaps. And he was flagged 1 time. So those are kind of your stats and your profile for the player there. What stuck out to you from the highlights for Aidze?
Yeah, it's always good when you're watching highlights of offensive linemen, isn't it? I try and watch just different players that play on the same offense so I can have a look at him. I've got no idea what to do with him. I quite like him, but I don't know where he's going to play. So the Eagles announced him as a tackle, which surprised me because I know a lot of people saw him as a guard. The Eagles tackles are normally really long and really big, and he does not fit the bill at all. You showed the numbers earlier on. I don't see him as a tackle, but I know the Eagles announced him as a tackle. I think I know why. So I watched a couple of his games or highlights, as you mentioned, and I think basically I'm not sure where he plays is my analysis of him, Shane. I think his arm length isn't good enough to be a tackle, but he's not strong enough to be a guard. So he's a little bit of like, where do you want him? I think the Eagles are either going to have to work with him as a guard or a tackle. It seems like they're going to start at tackle. I think that's because he's too weak to play guard, but I think their best bet might be to bulk him up and stick him at guard. So I had him as like a swing tackle, maybe backup guard at the next level. I think the cool thing about him is his versatility. You mentioned the positions he's played. Not many offensive linemen can play left and right side. He's played right tackle, right guard, left tackle. So he's got quite a cool versatility about him. I just didn't see basically enough strength to be a guard, and I didn't see enough length to be a tackle. There is one clip I sent you that I liked where you can see him at tackle. But again, when I'm showing you these clips, I don't really care about like him winning or something. It's just a senior bell rep. It's more about his size. Like I'm going to show you an offensive tackle later who's a lot bigger. He looks small to me. Like even though he wins here, his hand usage is pretty good. He doesn't strike me as somebody that's particularly long. His arm length looks quite short, and he manages to sort of hang on there. But I think he has the look of a guard who doesn't have the strength. The one thing I will say is when doing a little bit of reading about him, they did say he played well against Jonny Newton, who, as you know, was one of my guys. So that was quite a cool thing for me. That instantly had me interested because I'm a big fan of Newton. I just don't know where he ends up. I think he's like one of those players that might end up failing because he doesn't really knuckle down a spot. So I hope the Eagles give him a chance to, in my opinion, play guard, because I just don't see the Eagles playing very small tackles. You look at even like Mekhi Becton, who they signed. tackle. They normally target giants on the edge, and he doesn't fit the bill. I'm not sure he has the arm length that will allow him to survive outside, but that's just personal opinion on him, I guess.
All right. So that is, I'm going to say his name again, Gottlieb Ayidze out of Maryland. Let's go to the guy that Charles is here for right now. The next guy on our list is running back Kendall Milton. So here is his spider chart. He is 6'1", which is 95th percentile for height, 225 pounds, which is 81st percentile weight. He had a 26th percentile 40-yard dash, but he did have an 86th percentile 10-yard split. So quick to top speed, and then maybe not the best top speed overall. He had an 83rd percentile broad jump, and overall he has an 8.07 relative athletic score. Across his 4 years at Georgia, he rushed for 1,839 yards and 23 touchdowns. However, he only played 514 snaps in those 4 years, and he has a laundry list of injury concerns. He's had hamstring injuries that he's dealt with throughout seasons, throughout training camps. He's had a groin injury. He's had multiple MCL sprains, and so he does have a bit of an injury-prone label from people. He was never able to sustain a high workload at Georgia. In 2023, he had 99 carries for 644 yards and 10 touchdowns. So, I mean, a touchdown every 10 carries is pretty impressive. He had 4.12 yards after contact per attempt, and he forced 25 missed tackles. And again, that's on 99 carries, 25 missed tackles forced. And he had 22 runs over 10 yards out of the 99. So those are really good numbers. He also had 24 pass blocking snaps, and he allowed 0 pressures. So he's a guy that looked good in really small volume. You know, what volume is there in the Eagles offense? Will he be able to stick? Those are questions I don't know the answer to. But Jonny, what did you see? What kind of stuck out to you when you went to the film for Milton?
Yeah, this was the one that I watched the most film on because guess what? He's a running back, so I enjoy watching running backs, as we know by now. I really like him. And I say really like him again. Really like him for an undrafted free agent. I think he's the perfect kind of UDFA you want to sign. Very different profile to the Eagles backs. So height, weight, big guy, like very big, like hand size, arm length, weight, like just wingspan. He's just big, and Gainwell and Shipley are not. So I think as a running back 4, he fits the profile of someone different. You mentioned the reason why he went undrafted. It's injuries largely, so I won't go into that. He's not creative. So as a drafted free agent running back, he's not someone that's going to like create yards that aren't there. He's not going to someone that's going to like wiggle behind the line of scrimmage and make defensive tackles missed and suddenly like create something out of nothing. He's much more like a get what is blocked guy, but he has value for that. He's never going to be a starting running back. The elusiveness isn't there. The footwork isn't there. But despite saying all this, he's a little stiff. However, he's big. He's physical. He has really good contact balance, and he lowers his shoulder, and he has really good vision. Like that's sometimes what you need from a running back. Like, yes, he's upright. Yes, he's a little slow to turn. Yes, he's a little sluggish, but he will get what's blocked. Guess what? I'm going to say he enjoys outside zone, which is something we speak about a lot on this podcast since Kellen Moore was hired as OC. You can do worse for a UDFA. If he has to play, he'll get what's there. And the Eagles do have a big physical back in Saquon Barkley, but you also don't want Saquon Barkley maybe charging into defenders every single play. You don't want to run him down on 3rd and 1 all the time. If you want to bring in someone different that's not Gainwell or Shipley and just literally let him do his thing, I think Milton makes a lot of sense as a full running back on a team. I imagine he's got good special teams traits as well. I did not watch him on special teams, but again, he's big, he's physical, good contact balance, explosive. So I would be quite surprised if he isn't able to contribute on special teams. He also looks like someone who will be really good at gap scheme stuff. So if the Eagles do want to blend Kellen Moore with more of Stoutland stuff, they want to run some power, they want to run some counter. I think he can sort of do everything. So like, why the hell not? I see like a not very creative, quite a stiff runner, but someone who can basically get what's blocked for you and can do it with a bit of physicality and a bit of strength. There is a really nice clip, Shane, that I sent you, which sort of sums him up. If I could show like one clip that I like that sort of gives you an idea of the traits. I think the one I sent you is the one I'm about to talk about, so hopefully it is. It's a rep of outside zone, and you can see how quickly he cuts it back. Yes, it is a giant hole, but still, running back sometimes don't spot it. But you could also see like he's a little stiff. There's no great like explosiveness there. You could also see he's a big guy. You mentioned the 10-yard split and then the slow down. Like the first 5 yards, he's pretty quick, and then he looks like he's stuck in the mud a little bit. So he's not going to take like 25, 30-yard runs. But, sometimes you don't need that. If you can read outside zone, if you can find the cutback lane, if you can pick up 8-9 yards, he's not going to be Saquon Barkley. He's not going to be a starting running back in this league. But you know what? For a fourth running back, you could do a lot worse. And I think the Eagles potentially have a need at fourth running back. You might be able to stash him on the practice squad, promote him to the roster if someone gets hurt. And I do think he's different to the backs they've got already. So yeah, I liked him. I think he's a fun watch, even if he's not explosive. He's not a limited touches player. Someone that's going to take a 5-yard carry and turn it into a huge play. He's much more of your sort of steady, good vision, good physicality, good contact balance. And yeah, if you look on his highlights on YouTube, there's a couple of fun runs where he runs over guys. You showed the statistics. He can definitely break tackles as well. So as far as UDFA's running backs go, I think he is a pretty decent shot to at least make the practice squad, and hopefully, just because I like running backs, make the running back as their fourth running back as well. Sorry, make the roster as their fourth running back as well.
All right. Before we move on to our next player, we've got a comment coming in from Sports Edits on YouTube, supposing that he's the only one that loves us. So I don't know what that's about, but everybody else, you're just going to have to chime in and show Sports Edits there. But we do appreciate the comment. Thank you for tuning in to hear us talk about UDFAs in the middle of the workday, in the middle of June. That's great. So we're going to keep moving along here to another offensive tackle. This is a guy that Jonny mentioned earlier.
Actívate porque llegaron los Power Penny Days de JCPenney, con miles de ofertas de $5 a $25 mientras duren, como camisetas para toda tu familia a solo $5. Y las toallas de baño Home Expressions Quick Dry también están a $5 cada una. Además, encuentra lo último en electrónicos pequeños de cocina a solo $19. JCPenney, vale la pena. Ofertas válidas del 22 al 25 de agosto en selección de estilos. Las ofertas Power Penny se excluyen de los cupones. Detalles en la tienda jcp.com.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
It's Aneem Denkwa from Howard. He played 33 games for Howard University. He was first team All MEAC 3 times, and he was an HBCU All-American each of the last 2 years as he was part of Howard's back-to-back MEAC championship squads. He is massive. He is 6'7 3/4, which is 91st percentile, 353 pounds, which is 97th percentile. And he has an 82nd percentile arm length. Now, he does have a 3.39 relative athletic score, and it's due to poor runs, poor agility, poor broad jump. I mean, he ran a 5.44 40. So we're not talking about a guy that can move very good. And I think, Jonny will get to that here in a minute, but he played a whole lot of left tackle at Howard, 1,951 snaps at left tackle. He played 81 snaps at left guard, 9 snaps at right guard, and 151 snaps at right tackle. Last season, he allowed 3 sacks and 15 pressures, and he committed 6 penalties on 291 pass blocking snaps. I guess I should say the penalties, it was 6 penalties on 595 total snaps. It could have been holdings on run plays or things like that as well. But that's sort of the guy you're looking at. He's a left tackle only. He's massive. He's slow. What else sticks out to you as you watch the film, Jonny?
I'm just going to say, if this guy turns into like a decent player, then Jeff Stoutland should be like president or something. Like, I don't know, the highest, just put him in charge of the world or something, because if he can fix this guy, then I trust him to do anything. This guy is like my favorite guy I've ever watched. He is, when you look at the numbers, offensive tackles with size, Shane, we know teams overdraft them every year. So when you get an undrafted free agent for a tackle that's played quite a lot of games and he's as big as he is, you're thinking the film must be bad. And the testing is bad. And I know people can talk, look at Jordan Mailata. He was very raw. But Jordan Mailata was a freak of an athlete. This guy is just big. He's slow. He's not explosive. And honestly, when I say raw, I mean, like, as raw as can possibly get. Like, I watched a couple of clips with him at the Shrine Bowl, and he is the biggest man I think I've ever seen. Like, there is a clip, and this actually isn't the clip I've got for the pod, but it will be in the article when it's released, when he's just standing next to 4 other offensive linemen, and he looks like he's won a competition. The other 4 look like they've won a competition. They're like kids. He's so much bigger than the right guard, like stupidly big. However, play the clip, Shane, that I sent to you before the episode. And when I say raw, I mean there is when you talk about a lack of coordination. Like, I always use the term like hands and feet aligned. I'm not an offensive line coach, so I'm going to tell you what he should be doing. I'm just going to say whatever it is he should be doing, it's not that. Like, the footwork is all over the place. The reach with his hands, like, it is about as raw as it possibly gets. So, like, I secretly love the pick because I'm just fascinated to see if Stoutland can do anything with him. I know why they drafted him, because you can't draft that size. Like, you don't get that size very often. I'm sure Stoutland's going to be excited. But if he turns him into a player, then, like, I have nothing else to say about Jeff Stoutland ever, because he must be the most difficult project he will ever have. Forget Mailata. People talk about Mailata as a project. His was all technique. He was a freak of an athlete. Like, everyone's seen the clips of Mailata playing. You can turn that guy into something with technique. This guy needs everything, but he's absolutely massive. So I sort of secretly love the pick because I think it's just hilarious. And I really hope he plays in the preseason, as long as the quarterback doesn't get injured, who's starting behind him, because I think he might be that raw, but it's just like a bit hilarious. So my optimism level on Dankwa is not very high, but why the hell not? He is huge. And as I said, if they do develop him, then I will be so impressed. Even more impressed with Stoutland than I thought I could ever be.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about Jordan Mailata being raw and, like, he hasn't played the position. I think you would rather have a guy that hasn't played the position than have a guy that's played the position as much as he has and it look like that. And you mentioned the athleticism, and I was trying to pull up Jordan Mailata's numbers, and the RAS website's being a little funky right now, but I will pull those up at some point on this podcast and we can circle back and compare them. Actually, I've got it up right now. So Dankwa he's shorter than Jordan Mailata by like a quarter inch, and he outweighs Jordan Mailata by like 6 pounds. So they're basically the same size wise. Jordan Mailata ran a 5.12 40 versus a 5.44. Jordan Mailata ran a 4.67 short shuttle versus a 5.21. So those are the only drills that they did that overlap. We don't have the 10-yard splits or the broad jump for Jordan Mailata, but Jordan Mailata was just a much better athlete. And honestly, when you're going to roll the dice on a guy, I would rather it just be a guy that hasn't played than a guy that has played that much and looks that unrefined. But again, the size is huge. It doesn't cost you anything. So I'm happy to take the swing on it, but I don't really expect much there.
Yeah, that clip is, and that's not the only clip, by the way. There are others when, he doesn't look like and it could be he's had terrible coaches or he's not, for some reason, developed over time. And it could be that, again, nothing personal against him. It's just, it's very raw. Like, the lack of coordination is pretty striking. But he is massive. Did I mention that he is absolutely massive, Shane? Like, maybe you can't teach size. It's very basic, but you can't teach someone to be that size. So who the hell knows? But yeah, if he ends up making the roster in a couple of years and ends up playing games, I will be amazed.
All right, well, let's keep rolling along to our next guy. It's tight end McAllen Castles from Tennessee. He played for California, UC Davis, and Tennessee across his collegiate career, where he took a total of 2,004 snaps. He is 6'4", 244, ran a 4.67 40-yard dash, and overall had an 8.59 relative athletic score. No spider chart because he wasn't at the combine, and they only use combine measurements there. As for some stats, he caught the third most touchdowns, 5, by an SEC tight end in 2023, and he ends his career with 92 receptions for 1,226 yards and 14 touchdowns. In 2023 at Tennessee, he took 55% of his passing snaps in the slot. So a lot more of a slot player than anything else for Tennessee. But Jonny, what sticks out to you when you looked at his film?
Yeah, this might be the one that I'm sort of interested to see how it develops. I mentioned this in the article, but the Eagles just can't develop a second tight end, like no matter what they do. So the thing that I find weird about him is he is extraordinarily lean. He looks extraordinarily lean, but then he's actually 244. So he's not too small. But then you watch some of the film and you see him as like a H-back. You see him blocking for like running backs. You see him sort of doing sort of the dirty work, shall we say. And that surprised me a little bit because I expected to just simply seeing split out wide all the time. So we spoke about Kellen Moore needing like a H-back. We spoke about him looking after maybe like a Ben Sinnott in the draft. Maybe they view this guy as that kind of guy. I know you mentioned the touchdown stats, but I watched quite a few of his touchdowns, and I swear to God, he is just always wide open. Like, I don't know anything about college, Shane, about the conferences they're in, the teams they're playing, but I didn't understand who was covering him because I was like, someone give me a rep where I actually get to see this guy run a route, and I just saw him running versus air. So I do have one clip I sent you of one of his touchdowns. And again, I'm only showing these to the podcast more to look at traits. So he's wide open in this play because like most of his touchdowns, he's always wide open. And I saw you nod your head at that, whether you've watched him a little bit as well and you saw the same thing. He's always wide open. So you can see here, he's wide open. But the two things that I like about this rep is number one, you can see how long he is. Like he looks like a big slot. He doesn't look like a tight end. He is lean. For 244, he looks in very, very good shape because he is very lean. And the other interesting thing about this clip is that he lines up as a H-back. So I do have a clip in the article of him blocking as a H-back. And then this is a clip where he's lined up in the backfield and running a route. So maybe there's a little bit of versatility that you can develop there. Maybe that's why the Eagles liked him. Again, I don't really expect anything, but he's a UDFA. But you never know. The Eagles have struggled with tight ends for a while. And I like the profile in terms of the size. I like the profile in terms of the athleticism. The vertical and broad jump, as you mentioned, are really good. And the 20-yard split's pretty good. So who knows? He's someone that I'm a little bit optimistic about. Maybe in a couple of years' time, we could potentially see him develop into like a tight end 3, maybe like a multi-role tight end who can do a few different roles for you. But I don't know if you watched any of him, but he's just always open. And not because he's like running really good routes, just the way they schemed him open and the way defenses didn't seem to have an idea what Tennessee was doing at times. It was slightly weird because I swear he's always open.
Yeah. You mentioned not knowing a lot about how college football conferences and things work. Would it shock you to know that Tennessee plays in the Southeastern Conference, the SEC, which is considered like the premier defensive conference in college football?
Weird. Fair enough. Like I literally thought that because I saw some of the teams he was going against. And obviously I recognize names of colleges and stuff. But I mean, just go on YouTube, type in McCullen Castle's highlights, and he's just like wide open on like 3 or 4 touchdowns. And I'm like, oh, I didn't really see what I wanted to see here. But yeah, bit weird.
There's the reason for that. So I don't know if you've noticed like watching college film, but the hash marks are way wider in college than they are in the NFL. It's like, I think it goes from like 18 feet in the NFL to over 40 feet in college. And so what that allows teams to do is spread, like if you're on the left hash, you've got so much more room to work with on the right side in college. And so Tennessee is kind of famous for their tremendously wide splits from their wide receivers. And if you think about what that makes the defense do, it just stretches it out and it makes it easier to see. It makes it easier to read the defense. It gives them more horizontal stretch. I remember talking about that when, who was the quarterback that came out of Tennessee last year that the Lions drafted? I can't remember his name now. Anyways,
not Hendon Hooker, was it not?
Yes, and
there we go.
I kept wanting to say Malik Hooker, and I was like, that's a safety for Dallas. Hendon Hooker. I remember talking about that with people. Like, this is why he's not a good NFL project. That offense just does not translate. You just can't do it in the NFL. But so that's maybe a little bit of why he's just always so wide open, despite playing in one of the best conferences in NCAA.
Yeah, and again, it's not a knock on him. It's just traits wise, he's an interesting guy though, because yeah, whenever I see someone play like in the backfield, slot out wide, and as an inline tight end, instantly I just wonder if there's something there you can develop. But he looks pretty lean to me. He looks more like a big slot style. So whether he has the juice to handle like inline responsibilities, we'll probably find out in the preseason over the next couple of years.
Yeah. All right, let's keep the ball rolling here. Let's go to safety Andre Sam from LSU. He is 5'11", which is 13th percentile, 191 pounds, which is 5th percentile, with 6th percentile arm length. Overall, he had a 5.45 relative athletic score. He played in 58 games in college across 3 different schools. He was a 2-time All-Southland Conference first team when he was at McNeese State. Then he went to Marshall. Then he went to LSU, where he was named LSU's Defensive Player of the Year in 2023. Across his 6 years in college, he played 2,764 snaps on defense. About half of those were at free safety. About a quarter of those were in the slot. And then about 15% in the box and 10% at boundary cornerback. In 2023, he allowed 22 receptions on 34 targets for 304 yards, 1 touchdown. He had 3 interceptions and 2 pass breakups, and he gave up a 66.3 passer rating. He also had 2 penalties called on him. Across his career, he had 9 interceptions and 14 pass breakups, with only 8 total penalties. So a little bit of a ball hawk, although playing at lower levels until this final season. What did you see besides a tremendously small guy when you watched Andre Sam?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. If no one knows anything about him, this is the guy I'm rooting for more than anyone else. And if you don't know about his story, I'll tell you a little bit about why. I don't think he is going to make it as a player, sadly. He's 25 years old already. He'll be 26 this year, Shane, which is pretty extraordinary for a rookie. He is tiny. Like you mentioned the numbers, he's very small. He's not a great athlete. He is one of those guys fans are going to love because he's going to rock someone in the preseason. He's basically like a small safety. So you expect to see a single high safety, but you don't get that. He's not a single high safety. He is a split safety, like nickel cornerback style. He's good at coming downhill and wants to hit people. The problem is he's very light. And you can want to hit people in college, but when you get to the NFL at sort of 190, 5'10", I'm not sure coming down here he's going to be hitting bigger receivers. His coverage skills aren't good enough to see him in the slot. He's basically like the guy you can stick in as a split safety as a backup. But realistically, his best chance is going to be on special teams. He has the profile you want for special teams. On special teams, you want guys that hit and you want guys that are very physical. He does have quite a few interceptions in the past few years, maybe a little bit of a ball hawk there, but I've also watched some of the interceptions and I wasn't sure. Sometimes picks are a little bit lucky. I'm not sure. A lot of them weren't just sort of inaccurate throws where maybe he was aggressive and got slightly lucky, but still, he's still got to make the play. So fair enough to him. The reason why I like him, and I do think this might be a big reason why the Eagles drafted him, was I won't talk about it too much because there are loads of articles out there. So just Google Andre Sam. But they mentioned that his dad passed away when he was very young, and so did his grandfather, and he had a stutter, a disorder. And he speaks quite openly about it now. I think he's much more confident speaking in public now. And he talks a lot about sort of the resilience, losing family members young, and how sort of this article says he is sort of a one of a kind that I've linked to in my article for Bleeding Green. So I think the Eagles take culture seriously. And I think last year the Eagles culture wasn't great as a team. And you know what? Sometimes leadership comes in sports from weird places. And I don't think there's anything wrong with drafting really high culture, or if that's a word, strong culture setters as UDFA. Yes, he's a young guy, but he's not 21, he's not 22. He's technically in the prime of his career. And if a guy like that works on special teams and has gone through adversity and can help some of the Eagles players go through adversity this season as well, then I'm all for it. So out of anyone, he may be the maybe least likely to make it in terms of playing, but in terms of off the field, I am rooting massively for him. So if you're watching preseason this year and he's out there, especially if you're at the games, I think he deserves a massive cheer, and I hope that he does enough to make the team on special teams, or at least stick around in the practice squad and try and earn enough money from this sport for a few years. Because, yeah, the story is really cool. If you read more about it, I won't go into too much detail about it now, but if you read there, he has obviously gone through a lot and come out the other side. So it's a pretty cool pick because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was unaware of the story behind Andre Sam. I didn't get to, I didn't read about his background. I was into the stats and things. And so when you were pointing that out, it's like, that's a really easy guy to root for. And so, hopefully he's able to do well, whatever that looks like for him at the next level. But I'll definitely be rooting for him when we get into the preseason.
Yeah, so, sometimes it's UDFAs, isn't it? As I mentioned, you're sometimes looking for other things. They're going to be around it. There's a lot of players that you've got around over the summer camps and people that have gone through stuff and can help others out. And there's always a role for those kind of guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us to our final signing. And neither Jonny nor I watched a single snap of this guy on film because they don't exist. It's a guy that's never played football before. He is an international guy. I am going to butcher this pronunciation because there literally is not a pronunciation guide for him anywhere, but I believe it's Laken Vakali. I don't know for sure. He's 6'5", 318 pounds, 35-inch arms. He was born in New Zealand and then raised in Melbourne, Australia. He's the oldest of 5 brothers. Like I said, he doesn't have football experience because he is an international player. He also does not count against the Eagles' 90-man roster limit. So they can roster him throughout the entirety of the preseason without him counting towards that 90-man roster. There's not really much to talk about with him other than I've got a little bit of the background of how he came onto the Eagles' radar. So apparently his mom and dad were on vacation in Hawaii, and a friend of the Eagles international scout ran into his dad and was like, "Oh, that's a big guy," and started talking to him and realized he had like sons. And so the Eagles set up a workout with his oldest son. And so the international scout flew to New Zealand and they did a workout on a soccer field. And Laken said of the workout, quote, "Man, I was so puffed, but it was a good workout." He also said his previous exposure to NFL is playing a free trial of Madden on his Xbox as the Green Bay Packers. So that's it. He does have a background playing rugby and basketball. So, there's general athleticism there. There's some size. Can you imagine, though? I mean, the odds on this are longer than winning the lottery, but could you imagine if the Eagles eventually had a duo of starting offensive tackles from Australia that never played football before being on an NFL roster? It's not going to happen, but that would be incredible.
It would be pretty cool. Yes, I can admit I've watched as much film as I can, but there is nothing to see there. But it would be awesome, wouldn't it? It would be like a one-off thing. But who the hell knows? If they've got a lot of athleticism, then I also sort of think there's always a way you can figure those things out. But yeah, that's a pretty cool story. So well done. I didn't even bother to look him up. So you've beat me on that one, Shane.
I guess the better way to say that is we can both say that we've watched every single snap of football that he's ever played in his career. And so that's our infallible opinion of him at this time. That
makes the in-depth bit at the start of the podcast sound a lot better, doesn't it? There's your in-depth analysis. Every single snap. What more can you want? Just very, very quickly, Shane, I did not plan to do this, and I said we'd be under 45, and we are 41. Quick fire, put you on the spot, which I never do. I hate things like this, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is all for the listeners. Rank the Eagles UDFAs in terms of chance of making the roster with 0 preparation time, just to stress you out. Based on what we've discussed today, how would you do it? And you can throw it back to me as well. Or if you want to throw it back to me straight away and you want a second to think, go for it. This is show business, fellas. This is 0 preparation at all. Go for it.
I'll go Gabe Hall, most likely. Next, I will go... It's a toss-up for me between Castles and Milton. I will say Castles because I think the Eagles are already solid with 3 running backs. I don't know how likely they are to keep 4, but I'll say Kendall Milton 3rd, Andre Sam 4th, Gottlieb Ayidze 5th, Danquah 6th, and then the international guy, Vakali. I'm not sure how you say that, 7th. So that's my order.
Right, I will nearly the same. I'll definitely go Gabe Hall 1. I would go Milton 2. I will go surprise you maybe slightly and go with, is it Ayadezi? You pronounce it much better than me. I will go him 3rd because of the versatility. Then I will go McCastles 4. Is that it? McCastles 4 or no? Castles. There's too many players. Castles 4.
McAllen Castles.
McAllen Castles. There you go. There's a lot of C's. Then I will go Andre Sam 5th. And last but not least, as I desperately strode up my list, I will go with Danquah at 6. And then the international guy you mentioned at 7.
All right. So we're pretty close there. Yeah, appreciate that. I'm going to make you give grades next time we're on a show for something.
Predict a score. My connection may just go down. You may never hear from me again. It's like when you ask me for what are the Eagles going to do in June? What's your prediction for the season? Like, what is the point? Sorry to everyone who does that, but I have no idea who's injured and then who gets injured during the season, but that's a very boring answer.
So join us next week when we go week by week through the Eagles schedule and make record predictions.
in-depth matchup predictions as in week 16 of wide receiver versus cornerback matchup analysis, which by the time we get there, no one's playing because there's 3 people injured and it's all gone wrong. So there you go.
There you go. All right. Well, Jonny, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts, any takes you need to fire off for the people? The floor is yours.
No, not really. This is very much the off season. I did really enjoy it last week with Charles as well. So just because it's the off season doesn't mean that we're going to go away. We will try and come up with some cool things to do. We're going to try and get some really good guests in here. So there are some very big positives to the off season. We can sort of pause and maybe go in depth on a few players or a few positions. So last week we done it with a running back. Just keep an eye out for the shows. Keep an eye out for the guests we'll have, even if not every episode. It interests you, particularly this time of the year. Hopefully there'll be enough stuff out throughout the upcoming months that will. And also big shout out to Birds of the Roundtable. I've been listening to some of the stuff you guys do on the Eagles Pimple Network, which is very different to what we do, but it's also really cool. A little bit different style. And big shout out to John Stolnis, as someone who did not follow the Eagles in 2004. I am learning a lot about that season. I did not know that Owens and McNabb had the meltdown, and was it week 7 he was talking about on last Sunday's episode. So I didn't know that happened. So that wasn't mentioned, I don't think, in the Eagles DVD that I used to watch when I was learning about that season. So I am looking forward to next week's already.
Yeah, you guys be sure you're checking those out. If not, John does a fantastic job with the Eagles history stuff. It's been really fascinating to listen to. I was an Eagles fan, but not just barely back then. And then Birds of the Roundtable, tomorrow's episode will be out an episode will be out tomorrow. We're going to go through and power rank each offensive position group within the division. And then we'll do the same for defense next week. So be sure you check that one out. Keep it tuned to all the shows we've got here on the Eagles Pinpool Network. And we will catch you guys next week for another episode of On the Shane Page.